Welcome to See Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
Hello, my name is Teevee Aguirre. It's short for Natividad. I'm a father of two daughters, older daughters now. They're 20 and 18, divorced, quit my job in 2009 to be closer to them, to be more involved in their life as a parent, as a father. I wanted to be more involved for them. So I kind of risked it all. And from there, just started building a new life after my divorce. It was for them as much as for myself. And it's been a crazy ride of personal development internally, as well as a father. It's been a fantastic trip.
What was the big risk? What did you quit your job to go do?
I quit my job to do online marketing, started an online marketing agency.
Cool.
Initially was just graphic design because I still hadn't figured out the marketing piece.
Mm-hmm.
I had learned and taught myself Photoshop and graphic design. That's where I started making my first dollars, by doing design online for people. Quit to do marketing because I don't have to keep chasing people to find new business. So
I've been a graphic designer for more than 30 years, and people assume I know marketing, and I don't. I think it's something completely different. And
it is.
I've been chasing work for 30 years. I'm self-employed.
Yes, I saw that, by the way. You do some fantastic work, beautiful work.
Thank you.
That was the initial big lesson was, wait, graphic design is hard. It can be profitable, but back then I didn't even know what to charge.
I know it's hard to decide.
And then trying to chase new business all the time. So then I was introduced to marketing and putting people on residuals because you're producing results consistently. Like, oh, let me do that.
Just because you're a good designer doesn't mean I know marketing or PR or any of it.
It's its own realm, its own area of expertise.
Yeah, I think so.
A good graphic designer doesn't make a great marketer. They design pretty graphics. And
I can take all your ugly content and make it look really palatable.
there's value in that.
I've been very blessed to have some long-term contracts with the American Bar Association in Chicago as one of my clients. And so it just always comes. It just is always enough work.
I've gotten to a place where almost like magic, work appears, referrals appear, or I get found and they call me.
After this long of being self-employed, you get to the point where it always works out.
Yes.
It always comes.
You do it long enough, someone will think about you or look for you just the right time.
So true. You're like, oh no, I have no work. Oh wait, and I'm too busy. So let's talk about your very deliberate desire to be in your daughter's lives. Well, we hear that men aren't, or take a back seat, or don't make it a priority. Why was it a priority for you?
Wow, I already feel like emotional. It was a priority to me because growing up, I didn't feel like a priority.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like an afterthought. My father worked. I mean, immigrant family. Or looking back now, I understand a lot of the why, but I didn't feel like I had very much parenting. And for my daughters, I decided to take that approach because I wanted to be the father that I wish I had.
Mm-hmm.
I always told myself when I was younger that I would never do that to my own children. No matter what happens, I'm going to be there and I'm going to show up. Then I got divorced. So that was the big test. Like, all right, big boy, you say you're going to be there, but now you're divorced. And now the time I have with them will be even limited more. What are you willing to do? And I had heard right around that time that our perspective of our lives, our worldview gets shaped in those early years. And we essentially live out our adult lives through those lenses, through those beliefs that we formed, through those experiences that we had. That was the last thing I needed to hear. My daughters were 5 and 3 at the time, 4 and 2. It was time for me to do what I said I always would do and bet on myself, bet on them, and risk it for them. Because if nothing else, I felt like I'll be there. If nothing else, if the business fails, if I can't figure it out, we will have those years together before that falls apart and it will work itself out.
How often did you see them?
After the divorce?
Yeah.
I would see them every other week, the scheduled time. What the business allowed me to do is be more involved throughout their schools.
Yeah.
I would go to anything and everything that they were in, any performances, any plays. I was so involved that I even at one point became the PTA president.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was crazy. We started a chess club. We would do things together outside of the time that I was assigned as my parental, I guess, responsibility. So I was integral in as much of it as possible. Any time that I was allowed, I'd be there.
I tell people all the time, when they are staying in bad marriages, my mom and dad got divorced when I was 1, and my dad had me and my sister for 24 hours a week from Friday night to Saturday night.
Mhm.
And all of my childhood memories are of my dad because he was so present and always there and always doing stuff with us. And even though I lived with my mother, all the fond memories are of my dad. You don't have to actually be in the house to make a difference. So I just really appreciate that you're saying that.
It warms my heart every time I hear an adult woman speak so highly of their father.
Very lucky.
I learned that scarcity, in marketing teaches you this as well. Scarcity is a real thing for myself as well as for my children. The fact that we couldn't see each other as much, those scarce moments actually mattered even more.
That's the relationship you built, because I sadly followed suit and divorced my first husband when my kids were 2 and 6. And they didn't have the relationship with their dad, even though they spent summers with him. And I'm just saying it's not necessarily absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's something you've done and you've built. It's not just scarcity. I just want you to take credit for that.
You're absolutely right. I had less time with him, so I needed to really make it count.
Yeah.
And I was intentional when I had them. We were doing things. We always had something to do, to spend together, to create memories, to learn lessons. It wasn't the sheer amount of time I didn't have. It was that time and wanted to make sure it mattered.
Right.
And they were going to remember it. We did a lot. We always had something to do.
Do you have a message to fathers that are not in the home? I
do. It's something I talk about a lot in my own stuff, in my own podcast, my own stuff that I'm putting out. My message to them is that your role is very important, and that no matter what the circumstances are, because I can only imagine they vary, right? We're all a little different. Our divorce, our decree, our relationship with the mother, no matter what, it can work out. No matter how crazy it worked out, how y'all fell apart, showing up and being intentional is still possible. Doing it for the children. You mentioned earlier that people stay in relationships for the children. The more I thought about that as I was leading up to that point of making a decision, I needed a divorce for my children. My parents were in a relationship where they basically hated each other all their lives, and we got to witness that. That's not beneficial.
That's not teaching your child what a good relationship is or how to be loving. How is it benefiting them?
It doesn't benefit them, especially if it's a resentful relationship that you're still trying to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Leaving is actually not a bad thing, but being intentional now, it's all or nothing, and your time is valuable. Every conversation matters. Every engagement matters. It always mattered, but more so now. If you don't have that time, you have to work on yourself. You have to acknowledge where your shortcomings are and show up with the desire to improve on it every single time that you see your child when you have time with them. You clearly have something to work on if it was a divorce, and it's fine. We're all incomplete in some way, or we all have our scars and our trauma, but that doesn't mean that you don't show up for your child. Show up and improve, and they will appreciate it. As my girls are older now, they tell me often, and it makes me feel incredibly grateful to have made that bold decision back then.
I went to a conference in San Francisco, right before COVID. And it's called Wisdom 2.0, and it's all these healers, I would say. Anyway, I was listening to one person speak, and at the time, with my oldest sister, I was in I had posted something on Facebook. She didn't like it, and we were in a space where she was mad at me and I was righteous.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
And the talk was about not waiting till you're on your deathbed to apologize.
Mm.
And immediately after that talk, I wrote her a note saying I was sorry for hurting her. Even though I didn't apologize for what I had written, I apologized for hurting her by what I had written. And that mended the relationship. Just validating them and the feelings. I didn't say I wish I had done something different because I never did feel bad about what I wrote, but I did feel bad about hurting her by what I wrote. And there's a difference.
I think that's at the crux of it all is your feelings are valid. I did what I did. I don't feel like I did anything wrong, but you have a right to be upset.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that it affected you that way. I hear you. I see you.
Isn't that what we all want?
I think the thing that keeps people from acknowledging or getting there faster is ego.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really their ego that's being hurt and can't remove it or place it to the side to realize like, oh, I see what you're saying. That I'm sorry. I get it now. But it's the ego that says, no, but I'm right.
Ego's always in the way. Every problem we have is ego, I think.
I would agree with that.
What work have you done?
I've done a lot.
Like what? For others is the reason I'm asking.
Early on, I started taking NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, kind of a course on communication. And it first started to introduce me to this idea of personal development and really doing work. I'm certified as an NLP practitioner. I took the course. I ended up taking 2 levels. It was a weekend, a month for like 2 years. And through it, you learn how people communicate, how we hold trauma, how we can remove it. And we go through processes that had me bring up stuff and a lot of pain. That's when I first started recognizing how large a role my father had in my pain. Addressing it directly, that was huge. Once I started really working through that, I started realizing that I still, regardless of what happened, doesn't mean I don't have power to remove it and grow from it. Maybe not remove it. It's still there. It's in my head, but not let it have the power that it does. I've done therapy for several years. I'm always working on something to improve. Since I was a child, it was something that I've been a reader. So personal development books I started picking up when I was young and started really realizing that there was just so much to learn, so much growth to be had. So it's something that I'm perpetually working on and recognizing my own patterns and trying to dismantle them. One of the big things for me has always been to work on my own junk as quickly as possible. So that way I don't pass it on to my daughters. I would hate for them to have to deal with my trauma because I pass it on to them when they're 30 years old, 40 years old. So it's something I'm perpetually working on.
That's awesome. So as a mother, I had issues with my mother because she wasn't really present and she died when I was 18. So I didn't even have a chance to figure it all out and work through it with her. So for the majority of my life, I was angry with her. Everything was that fault until I can see that I have the choice to think differently about it. But I can see all the ways I've tried not to be like my mother. I was way more present. I was at every activity, but I wasn't perfect. Do you think your kids hold you or your ex-wife in any this is wrong because my parents did it wrong? I just think it's an impossibility to get out scot-free of not hurting your kids, even when your heart's in the right place.
I like to think that he's been the model for everything I am to not be, because I analyzed it. I'm very analytical.
Okay.
And I looked at the way he showed up, the way he valued money. He grew up in a different country, in a different time, different culture. So that was part of the reason he was who he was. So recognizing that, forgiving him for it. But I guess your big question was, is it possible to get away scot-free? No, it isn't, because we're still flawed, right? We're doing our work. Depending on when a memory was created, a moment happened.
Yeah.
Early on in the divorce, there was a situation where, I was under a lot of stress. The business was stressing me out. There was an internal struggle I had, an external, I suppose, between when I did have them. Even then, sometimes I'd feel, because I wasn't making enough money, like I need to work. Yeah, but my daughter's here. You need to be with them. So I'd be going back and forth, like they're here. Spend the time. Yeah, but I need to do. So there was that, right? And then the daughters were there, and we're living at my mother's, and they're being kids. They're being loud. They're being rambunctious. They're making a mess. And at some point, I remember walking over, and I lost it because there was an absolute mess.
Yeah.
I lost it. I threw everything off the desk, pick everything up. What are you doing? They start crying. They start picking up. I walk back to my room. I'm working at my bed, and then I start crying because I had done something that it wasn't their fault. They're being children. It was my stress levels. It was my insecurity. It was all me.
Mm-hmm.
I called them over. We sit down and I apologize. I must have been 6 and 4 at the time. I said, I am so sorry. Y'all did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're playing your handplay. And I was out of line. Please forgive me. They're on each side of me. They're like, it's okay, Daddy. It's okay. So we're all crying together. I'm so sorry. And they don't remember that much anymore. I don't have much time with them. I don't want to be upset with them. I don't want them to be upset with me. I don't have time to be mad at them and not speak to each other. So to answer your question about having bad memories, for the most part, they don't. But I will say they're in therapy. They've been in therapy. I'll put them in therapy to acknowledge and work on some things, because whatever I can't fix and whatever they maybe don't feel comfortable talking to me about, I want them to feel like they could talk to someone in case I do mess something up. It's been one of the most important things for me to do is call myself out. And they're allowed to as well. They're that, especially now that they're older, but then acknowledging like, what can I do to address whatever they may be going through with me or with their mother? Some of those negative moments are traumatizing, right? I read somewhere that trauma can become in any shape and form. It could be them just twisting their ankle. And the story of how it may have happened may have shifted something in them that they don't even recognize it. So it's easier to remember those than it is the good stuff, because maybe there's a lot of those. Memory just forgets those. They're not so prolific. They're not so big as they are those hard, painful ones.
I think I spent the majority of my life holding on to the painful ones. It gave me a story. Now, luckily, I don't need those. But I think that's what happens to people is that, I was hurt this way or I was hurt that way. And doing this podcast, I find, I've talked to people all over the spectrum. Like you're saying, it doesn't matter what the trauma is, if it's real for them. A counselor was telling me once that she was talking to somebody who was saying how hard it was to be the only redhead in her family, but it was traumatic for her. So you have to acknowledge that that's what her trauma was.
My older daughter has curly hair, but she's darker. So in her family, on her mother's side, she's an outsider. She's the one that looks vastly different than the rest. So she would get picked on her hair, her color, her everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she resembles me more too.
Mm-hmm.
So it made her an easier target. And it's something that she brings up often. Sometimes when she's like talking about some of the harder things in her life, like, yeah, they would make fun of me. And I can only imagine as a redhead, like it's so blatant. As kids, the children don't realize it, but they're just teasing each other. But that child, I have a sister who was heavier. She would get teased about being the gorda, the chunky one. And you think it's all in fun and games, but that's traumatizing.
100%. Yeah. I'm the youngest of 6 with only 9 years between us. And boy, was there a lot of teasing.
Some of that stuff hurts and it sticks.
The youngest brother was 6'3", very skinny, and had a big afro because it was the 70s. And they used to call him Q-tip, which is funny to me, but maybe not funny to him. I should ask him what he thinks about that.
I'm sure at the time it was something he just accepted. I was a skinny one. I had an afro. I'm not as tall as your brother, but I would get stuff like that. And who knows what we hold on to, what that trauma looks like. And like we bury that and it becomes something that we have to deal with for the rest of our lives.
Is it only with age that we can get to this point where we go, okay, I know how to hear what you're saying and not take it to mean my identity?
I think so. For the most part, any work that I've done for myself, understanding communication, understanding teasing, humor tends to be a little aggressive. And in a sense, it's hurting someone. It's targeting someone. It could be your sibling. What I've tried to always do with the girls is when I learn something, pass it on to them. When I learn some frameworks or some ideas, I pass it on to them. And I've always tried to pass that on to them so they would at least be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you're young, you don't know any better. Like, yeah, but she called me dark, or she called me this, or, daddy's girl. My older one gets called daddy's girl a lot because she tends to really resonate with me more. So I try to plant those seeds essentially. So that way, as they got older, they would recognize like she was just playing. We're just kids. No one knew. Older, hopefully in their 20s or late teens, as opposed to 40 or 50.
That's my hope for my children.
My podcast is really revolving around parenting. I talk a lot about it. Parenting, personal development. One thing that became really clear to me is if you become a better person, if you develop your personality, you deal with your trauma, you work through that, by becoming better, by making better choices, you automatically, magically become a better father, better mother, better partner, better human being. You show up in every context as a better version of yourself. Gary Vee, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He shared a story of this guy who was a pet owner, and he had two dogs that were they were horrible dogs, had them in an apartment, and he was if I remember the story correctly, on the edge of being evicted. And he was trying to tame them, trying to get them to come under control. He started picking up personal development books and self-help, that kind of category. He found that as he was starting to make changes in his personal life, he became a better pet owner, and the pets started becoming better. And that's when it clicked. Like, that makes perfect sense, because once you started improving as a human being, everything that you engage with will reflect some of that.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's so clear as day to me now, but I think we fail to recognize, I want to be a better father. Then work on yourself, work on engaging and dealing with the stuff that you don't speak about to people, that's buried, that could be the simplest of things to most people, but for you, it really means something. It's as simple as picking up personal development books, start making changes, start making better decisions, or getting therapy. And to me, the value is not just for my daughters, I want to be a better father, but the value in turn is you have a much more fulfilling and richer life. And everyone who's around you will appreciate you even more. I guess the other piece is we're all storytellers, right? And the stories that we created as children about our identity don't have to be the same stories. Like, we can rewrite those stories. And the sooner we recognize that, then the sooner we can start to make better changes, if not just for yourself, but for your children. So you don't have to be a victim. You can choose to be the hero in your story.
I 100% agree with you and believe you, because I have done it. But also, I would say a decade ago or more, I would have said, I can't rewrite my story. My story's my story. I agree with you now. But how do you convince somebody that that's true? Because what happened, happened.
It's a great question. I look at it this way. There's a car accident on the road. You're on your way to work. The facts of the matter is there's a car accident between here and your destination. To you, it could be the worst thing in the world, because it's keeping you from getting to work on time. And now your boss is going to be angry with you. Now, that story is true. However, there's another story. There's the story of the person in the car. And this actually happened once, not too long ago, when it really clicked. I'm here complaining, why is the person stuck in traffic? Because there's a car accident ahead of me. And that's my truth. However, the person's truth that's in that accident is dramatically different. Their life is entirely altered. In this particular instance that I just mentioned, there was a car on the edge of the bridge, barely hanging on. That person's life was literally on the edge. So yes, your story is correct, but there's multiple dimensions to that story. There are multiple ways to look at it.
Right.
And if the story isn't truly empowering you, then why not change it?
What you're saying, though, is there's somebody has it worse off than you. Even you can change your story in the car that, though I'll be late to work. So what?
I'll listen to a podcast.
It's just the way you handle it rather than having to compare your woes to somebody else's. I think that's important too. Somebody has it worse, but that can't be every story you have is that, oh, well, I'm not as worse off as this person. I think you have to find the positive rather than the negative.
Yes, I completely agree, because you're right. You can't always imagine there being a worse situation. My point being is that there's different ways to look at it and rewriting it in a way that's more empowering. When you came up with that story or your identity, or when this thing happened, you were younger. You were experiencing it in the rawest form. And what you drew out of it was the pain, because it was real. That's the reason it happened. And you shaped your identity around it. Now, knowing what you know now, being older, being wiser, perhaps knowing the background stories of the individuals that also played a role, and understanding well, for me, my father was an immigrant. He was illiterate. He couldn't pick up a book to help himself. if he wanted to and read it. My mother was not educated as well. They didn't know how to handle arguments. They couldn't resolve their conflicts. So they took it out on all of us. So they were flawed human beings creating life and then nurturing it as best they could. So knowing that, I'm like, well, of course I'm going to be a little bit of a mess.
Yeah.
So I choose to think of myself as a survivor, that they did what they could. This is the story I actually rewrote. My parents did the best they could. They got me as far as they could in this race of life. And it was up to me to thank them, acknowledge their efforts and, forgive them for what they could not do, and then take it from here. It's up to me now to be better. They did what they could with the resources they had on hand. And it's up to me now. I'm smarter. I'm more educated. I'm more resourceful. I live in the land of opportunity. So now I got this, right? That's the kind of way I help rewrite it. And I think we all kind of have that capacity.
Yeah, I love that.
If we choose to. And it involves forgiveness, like forgiving those participants or for putting me in that situation and hurting me. That's the way I feel that I would talk to that individual, to you 10 years ago.
Do you think everybody's doing the best they can at the time?
Yes, I do. There's a quote that has stuck with me years ago. Like, if you knew better, you do better.
Right.
And even though we have been given the information, like, well, this is what you should be doing, that's right, you still didn't know it. You didn't know it intrinsically. It wasn't a part of your identity, your story, your belief system. Because if it was, you would have done better.
Yeah.
At that given moment, you're doing the best you can with the information you have and the resources at your disposal. Sometimes it's not in your best interest, but it's what we do.
Mm-hmm. The episode that comes out this Saturday, her name was Corby. She had breast cancer 3 times and ended up having to lose her breast. You mentioned you were a survivor, and she said she's not a survivor because she's not hanging on by tooth and nail. Oh, and that image stayed with me, and I just really love that. I don't know. I'm just bringing that up because now I don't want to be a survivor. Somehow I want to rewrite that word. I love that she said that. I just want to maybe propose that to you, that was 20 years ago. I'm not there anymore. That's not my story anymore. I just like that.
Therein lies I won't say complexity, but the nuance to it. Whatever it helps you, whatever vocabulary you have at the moment, that makes perfect sense to me now. And I'll probably look to minimize the use of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to share that with you because I thought that was so beautiful that we're more than that.
Yeah. That would be version 3 of my story. As I keep rewriting and becoming more.
Thank goodness there's room for change.
Absolutely. What makes us better than before? What specifically do we have to do to become better? What's the instrument? Does that make sense?
Do you just mean like how you are in the world?
Whatever way you want to show up in the world. When you say, I want to become a better father.
Okay.
I want to be a better artist. What is that moment? What is the instrument? It's making better choices than before. It's that the moment of choice, like this way. Well, my younger self, my uninformed self would have made this choice instinctively. Mm-hmm. It's those choices because we are a result of our choices. Now, when we're younger and dumber and naive, we make dumb choices and then we put ourselves in circumstances that are not in our best interest. But as we get older, now we're more informed because we've lived through those. We've read some books. We've been in some therapy. So now when those moments show up again, we make better choices, make choices that are actually serve us better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I just want everybody to forgive everybody and know that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. That's a journey, I guess, you got to get to. Well, this has been really, really lovely. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
What a enlightening conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You said some things that I have to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of See Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thanks for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.